Hi everyone, welcome back to Grounded Haven. Today I am going to be doing another video showing you a bunch of meals that you can cook using lots of homegrown summer veggies. Last week I showed you some meals that were very easy and quick, and for this video I wanted to make a few recipes that take a little bit more time and effort, so they are really good for weekend meals or just for those days when you feel like doing something a little bit extra. For breakfast, we're going to be having sort of like a diner style breakfast. We're going to be doing some home fries. So I pulled out some potatoes, a shallot, a couple cloves of garlic, one sweet pepper, and a few eggs. So first I'm going to start by just chopping up my veggies. I am thinly slicing those shallots, and then I am going to dice up my pepper and my potatoes. I'm using an Anaheim pepper here, which is supposed to be like a mild pepper, but I really don't feel like there's much spice in this at all. So you can use a mild pepper or a sweet bell pepper, whatever you want. And then for my potatoes, I'm using 2 red potatoes and 1 gold potato. These are all kind of waxier potatoes, which I think works better for this because starchy potatoes can break down and they don't hold their shape very well. So I'm dicing up the potatoes in about 1/2-inch cubes. And lastly, I'm going to smash and chop 2 large garlic cloves. I've been preheating a 12-inch cast iron skillet while I've been chopping my veggies, and now I'm going to add my cooking oil, and I'm going to be using some beef tallow today that we have rendered out ourselves. And I think this is a great cooking fat to use for this meal because I feel like it will give a little bit more meaty flavor, kind of similar to like what you would get at a diner, because at a diner everything would be cooked on the same flat top and you'll get flavors coming from the bacon or sausage or whatever mixed in with your food to give it that extra flavor. So I thought that the beef tallow would kind of replicate that kind of essence, and I'm going to start by frying off my shallots in that beef tallow. Since the shallots are so thinly sliced and they also have quite a high sugar content, it won't be long before they start to brown. And so that they don't get too brown, I'm going to remove them while I cook the rest of the vegetables. And you could take them all the way too and create kind of like a fried shallot onion topping. And we're going to add this back in at the end. Then I'm going to add the rest of the veggies into the pan. So I have the potatoes and the peppers in here, and I'm going to salt them generously and add some cracked black pepper as well. Potatoes really need a lot of salt, so make sure that you season this very well. I'm adding a little bit more beef tallow just because the pan looked a little bit dry and I think the potatoes needed a little bit more fat to cook in, and then I'm going to let these fry for just a few minutes until the potatoes are just starting to get a little bit of color. After a few minutes, I'm going to add the chopped garlic and fry that off for another few minutes. I don't add this at the beginning because garlic burns very easily, and the garlic only needs to fry for a few minutes to release its flavor. I've learned from experience that potatoes take a long time to cook, and if you're just trying to fry them, they will either take forever or never cook fully. And what you really have to do if you're cooking potatoes from raw like this is you have to add some water to your pan and cover it with a lid, and this allows the potatoes to basically steam or boil, and this will help the potatoes to soften up. So I added probably about 1/4 to 1/3 cup of water into the pan and put a lid on it, and we're just gonna let that cook off for about 10 minutes. And this is the part of the breakfast that really takes a little bit more time, which is why we usually reserve this for weekends. And after it looks like that water has all been absorbed or steamed off, I am going to remove the lid, and now we're going to let the potatoes fry again. And this is really when they're going to get their browning. I did check to make sure that they were fully cooked through with a fork, and they were just about done, not too soft, but definitely tender. And if they're not fully tender, then you can just add a little bit more water and steam them again. I'm going to spread everything out so that it's laying in a single layer on the pan so that everything has nice contact, and then I'm going to try not to touch this so that the potatoes can brown where they are touching the pan and get a really nice crisp layer. So after a few minutes, the potatoes have started to brown up and are getting a little bit of that crispy edge that you get in home fries. And then I'm going to add my shallots back in that I removed from the beginning, and then our home fries are done. I'll remove the potatoes and put them on our plates for now, and we're going to be using the same pan to cook our eggs. I'm adding a little bit of oil here. And I'm going to fry 2 eggs for each of us, so 4 eggs total. And you'll notice that there's kind of like stuff sticking to the pan from the potatoes. I haven't figured out how to get potatoes to not stick to the pan. This time it wasn't too bad, but sometimes we get pretty bad stickage from the pan, especially if you're using more starchy potatoes. But I've learned that it's actually not a huge deal, because once you add your eggs, any of those crispy bits that were left over from the potato will magically stick to the eggs, and you end up with this really like nice seasoning at the bottom of your eggs that makes them even better. So I don't even worry about it, and I think it actually makes the dish as a whole much better. So I've just seasoned my eggs with salt and pepper, and then again I'm adding the lid onto this pan, and this helps for the tops of those egg whites to set properly. I did have one of the yolks break because egg yolks tend to break when they are warmer, and we do store our eggs at room temperature since they're fresh eggs, but that's no problem. Aaron actually likes his eggs more well done than me, so he usually just gets any eggs that break because that means that they cook a lot faster. And as I remove these eggs, that broken egg was a little bit ugly, but the rest of them look good, and you may be able to tell that I kind of have to like gently work my spatula under each of these eggs to release them from the pan, and that's because they're sticking to that layer of fond that was developed on the pan from the potatoes. But it just takes a little bit of maneuvering, and then the fond comes right up with the eggs, and you actually end up with these really flavorful, lacy, crispy bits that I really love. And then for the final meal, we like to have some cherry tomatoes on the side, and I also like to have a little spoonful of our homemade sauerkraut as well. I think that flavor goes really well with the potatoes, and it's also just really good to have a little bit of a fermented food as often as we can, because it's really good for your digestion and for your gut health. And of course, if you want a little bit of ketchup on the side, that goes great with the potatoes as well. So this is like our ideal weekend meal that takes a little bit more time to cook than our usual like scrambled eggs or something like that. We always joke that this meal takes like 25 minutes to make, but only 2.5 minutes to eat, because it is really good and it really will make you feel like you're at a nice diner, but you get to enjoy it in the comforts of your own home. And I just wanted to show you the underside of that egg there, where you can see all of those little bits that it picked up from the potatoes, which are so good. For lunch, we're going to be having some paninis that we're going to make on the grill, along with some grilled mixed summer vegetables. I'm going to start by chopping the vegetables. I have a whole mix of things here, pretty much just whatever we have recently picked and is in our fridge. There's not really any rhyme or reason, it's just whatever we have grown, I'm going to grill. And grilling is just one of my favorite ways to cook up lots of different vegetables. Today I have some eggplant, a few peppers, as well as some okra. And this is going to be such an easy way to prepare vegetables. The only work really is just chopping them up, and I'm cutting them into kind of large-ish chunks so that they don't burn too easily on the grill. And before I move on to cutting the okra, because okra can be a little bit slimy, I'm going to cut up the tomato that's going to be for our paninis first. And I am using a nice heirloom tomato here. This is a Paul Robeson tomato, which is really beautiful. And I'm just gonna set that tomato aside for when we assemble the sandwiches and finish up cutting the okra. For any small okra, I'm gonna leave that whole, but for most of them, I'm going to cut them in half. Grilling okra is definitely one of my new favorite ways to cook it up. Since okra can be a little bit slimy, It's not really for everyone, but I find that either roasting it or grilling it really minimizes that slime factor. I personally don't even really mind the texture, but some people are sensitive to it, so if you're unsure about it or if you think you don't like it, try grilling it up and see if you like it better. Now I'm going to assemble our sandwiches. I'm starting off with a couple of rolls of ciabatta sandwich bread, and for our spread we are going to be using this pesto. This is a green onion pesto that I made last year that is really good. I like it because it has kind of a more assertive flavor than basil pesto, which is a little bit more delicate. And I'm trying to clear all of the pesto out of my freezer that I made last year because I made a fresh new batch this year, so I am using up all of the older stuff to make room for the new stuff. So I'm going to spread a generous amount of that pesto onto the bottom of the bread, and then I'm going to add a slice of cheese. I am using provolone here. Then I'm going to layer on my onions and my tomatoes. I seasoned the inside of the sandwich with salt and pepper, and the last thing we're going to add to this is some pickles. These are sandwich pickles that I canned earlier this year, and this is already our second jar of this. We've really been enjoying them. They are really good for paninis. I think these are a little bit less sweet than the bread and butter pickles that I have made in the past, so I like that a lot, and we only have one jar left of this, I think. So next year I think I'm going to add this to my list of pickles to make more of. They're really good in these like kind of grilled panini sandwiches, but they're also really good for fresh tomato sandwiches as well. So the sandwiches are assembled. I'm going to set those aside and we're going to take them outside. But for now, I'm going to finish up those vegetables that I have chopped, and I'm just going to keep it really simple and use some extra virgin olive oil, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. This is how I treat most of the vegetables that I grill. It is really simple because when you're starting with really nice fresh vegetables that you've grown yourself, they already have so much flavor and they don't need much to jazz them up. So I really like to keep it simple, and that way we can taste the pure flavors and textures of our homegrown veggies. So now we're going to bring everything outside to the grill, and before I throw any food on here, I'm going to stick a cast iron pan in here and let that preheat for a few minutes. This pan is going to go on top of our panini to really make the top layer of it really crispy, so I want that pan to be nice and hot before we add anything else. While that's preheating, I'm going to go out into the garden and pick a couple more things to grill up. I have a few ears of corn that look like they're ready, so I'm going to add those to our meal today. And growing homegrown corn is so fun. I love that I can just like go out and pick it right before our meal or while I'm cooking even, and just throw it right onto the grill. I think that's such a fun part of growing your own food, and it actually just makes it really convenient too. And with corn specifically, the fresher the better, because the second you pick corn, any of the sugars that are in there start turning to starch. So as your corn gets older, it's not going to be as sweet. So it's really cool that we can just go out and pick it right off of the stalks and add it to the grill. I picked 2 ears of corn so that we could each have one, and the pollination on these ears was not as good as some other ones that we've picked before, but honestly, since our entire corn bed had fallen down while it was growing from a really bad storm we had, I'd say that they did pretty well. So now that my pan has been preheated, I am going to just move it off to the side while I add my pan with the paninis on there. And I decided to use a smaller cast iron skillet rather than the griddle that I was preparing them on, just because I didn't think I was going to have enough space on the grill to have the griddle and my grill pan. So I'm just going to move those pans off to the side and then add my grill basket for my veggies, and then I can just dump the entire bowl of veggies right in there. It's so easy and simple, and grilled veggies are just a staple of our summer meals because you can literally throw anything in there and it cooks up really quickly on the grill, and of course you get that wonderful smoky flavor as well. Then I'm going to add my corn to the front of the grill where it's a little bit cooler so they don't burn. And then I'm just gonna close up the cover and let everything get hot and cook in there. And the other nice thing about grilling outdoors in the summer is that I can take those few minutes while everything is cooking to just walk around the garden, maybe pick a few things or check on things. But also the bad thing about grilling out near the garden is that sometimes I get a little bit distracted, so I have to make sure that I don't leave my grill unattended for too long, which sometimes does happen. So some of my veggies did get a little bit dark here, but it's no big deal. They'll just be extra crispy. I'm just gonna give everything a good mix and make sure that everything is cooking evenly because we do have hot spots in our grill and the veggies in the back tend to darken a lot quicker. So I like to make sure I'm rotating everything and rotating the corn as well so that the other side can get some nice char on it. And now I'm checking on my sandwiches. They look pretty good. The cheese has melted, so I know that it's getting really nice and hot in there. But again, because we do have hot spots, I'm going to rotate the positions of the sandwiches because I could tell one of them was getting a little bit darker. So I'll just switch them around, put that top cast iron skillet back on there to smash them down and make the tops crispy, and close up the lid again. And now everything's just gonna need a few more minutes to cook. And when everything's done, we just have to serve everything up, and then we're going to have a nice lunch outdoors on our patio. We've really been loving these grilled paninis lately. It's something a little bit more special because during the week we have a lot of like simple tomato sandwiches with some mayo and some untoasted bread, but these paninis are basically that sandwich taken up a few levels. You have those extra fillings in there with the pesto and the red onions, and they get really nice and crispy and melty on the grill. And what's also nice is that if I cook a really nice big batch of grilled veggies during the weekend, then we can have any leftovers for during the week to accompany any sandwiches that we have or other meals. It's really nice on the weekends when we can just have a slower meal outdoors and just enjoy the view of our garden and all of the sounds of the birds and the animals. I think that's probably one of the best parts about summer. Here's a close look at what that sandwich looks like. So delicious with that melty cheese, and you can see the bottom is really nicely browned and crispy. Sometimes a little cheese oozes out and browns and caramelizes in the pan, and it's even better. For a snack, I'm going to be making a white bean hummus, and this is a great thing to make ahead during the weekend, and you'll have it all week long, and you can dip all sorts of things in this, and it's just a nice thing to make ahead. It's also great for like picnics or beach trips. I'm starting off by smashing 2 large cloves of garlic and also cutting 1 lemon in half that we're going to use the juice of. And I have my food processor out, and I'm just going to start by mincing up that garlic in the food processor to make sure it gets really chopped up. Next, I'm going to add some tahini, and tahini really tends to settle, so make sure you mix up your tahini really well before spooning it in. I am eventually going to try making my own tahini with sesame seeds because tahini is really just ground up sesame seeds. There are no other ingredients, but I still had this jar of store-bought tahini, so I'm just using that up right now. And then I'm going to juice my lemon, and I'm going to whip the tahini and the lemon juice and garlic before I add the beans for the hummus. I don't know where I've heard this, but I've read or seen somewhere that if you like whip up your tahini like this, it makes for a much fluffier hummus, so that's the way I always do it. So after that's been mixing for a little bit, I'm going to add my beans, and hummus is usually made with chickpeas, but I also really like to make it with white beans. I find that you can even get it creamier with white beans than you can with chickpeas because chickpeas can be a little bit grainy. I'm using Great Northern beans here, but you can also use cannellini beans. And then I'm adding some salt in here. The amount of salt you need will vary greatly depending on what kind of beans you use, whether you're using store-bought canned. Today I'm using homemade beans from dried. So you just have to taste it and add salt accordingly. I also like to add black pepper and ground cumin. And as this mixes up, I just make sure to scrape down the sides. And in order to get a good consistency, you can add olive oil or water to thin this out. I usually add about a tablespoon or two of olive oil, but the consistency is really up to you as well. If you like it thinner or thicker, you can just adjust it to your preferences. But that's all there is to it, really simple, easy ingredients. Most of these things are pantry staples, so if these are things that you normally have in your fridge, you can just whip this up anytime you want for a really nice, easy dip or spread. Once everything is all blended up and smooth, I'm going to remove this and place it into my Tupperware container for the week. You can see how smooth and creamy that hummus is. And you can really experiment and make hummus with any kind of beans that you have. This is a really great snack to have for the week. Beans are high in protein and also fiber as well, so it's a really nice healthy snack to have on hand. So I'm going to top this off with a little bit of olive oil on the top for extra flavor and also to thin it out a little bit since my hummus was a little bit on the thick side. I also like to add some more freshly cracked black pepper on top as well as a sprinkle of paprika for flavor and also color, and that is our finished hummus. Hummus keeps really nicely in the fridge. You can have this all week long. Since this is a snack, I'm going to serve it with some things to dip into the hummus. So I have some fresh garden veggies here. I have a cucumber as well as a sweet bell pepper that I'm just going to cut up into some nice sticks for dipping. And the great thing about this is you can kind of just use whatever vegetables you have coming from your garden. So other than cucumbers and bell peppers, which are a few of our favorite things for this, you can also use carrots or radishes, maybe some sugar snap peas or snow peas, or you can also dip some fresh flatbread or pita chips into it. It's just a very versatile thing to have and a great thing to make ahead during the weekend for your week. For dinner, I am going to be making a focaccia, which is a really easy bread to make. I'm starting off by weighing off my ingredients. Lately, I've taken to measuring my ingredients with a scale, not necessarily because it's more precise, but honestly just because it takes fewer bowls. You can literally just like throw everything into the same bowl. Just zero out your scale in between each ingredient and just toss everything in. I will link the recipe that I'm using in the description box, and I am 1.5ing this recipe to make for a larger focaccia that will fill in an entire baking sheet. And I liked this recipe because it only takes a few hours. A lot of focaccia recipes will call for leaving the dough to proof or rise overnight in the fridge for extra flavor, but since I kind of decided last minute to make this focaccia, I wanted something that would be ready that day to bake. So I started this in the afternoon after lunch, usually around like 2 or 3 if I am planning on baking a bread for dinner. That's when I will start it to make sure everything has enough time to rise. And the other thing that I am adding to this recipe that's not included is some dried rosemary, because I really like rosemary in focaccia. So I'm gonna let that knead in my stand mixer for a few minutes, and once everything is nice and smooth, I'm just going to use a dough scraper to scrape off my dough hook and also the sides of the bowl to make sure everything is incorporated. And then I am going to drizzle a good dose of extra virgin olive oil into the bowl, and make sure to coat my dough and the bowl with this so that it doesn't dry out while it rises. And this is one type of bread where I do not mind going overboard on the oil because we are going to be really coating this heavily with olive oil later on. So I will just do a good tablespoon in there, and if there's extra, it's going to be used later on anyway. So I'm just going to cover this with a damp cloth, and that's going to rise for 1 to 2 hours until it is doubled and really puffy. And when I came back an hour and a half later, here's what it looks like. Very puffy, very risen. And now I am going to turn it out onto my baking sheet. And first I'm going to add a good dose of olive oil. This is one kind of bread where you cannot be scared of using olive oil because it uses a very, very healthy amount of olive oil. It is there for the flavor, but also for the texture. We're going to coat the bottom of this baking sheet with the oil and add the dough on top. And what happens when you bake it is this oil essentially fries the bottom of the bread, and it makes for a really, really delicious crispy bottom that is really essential to focaccia. So I'm gonna add my dough to my baking sheet now. And since I did 1.5 this recipe, it should fill my entire baking sheet. So I am going to stretch it out and get it mostly to the edges, but you'll find that when you first try and stretch this out, the dough will kind of spring back. And all dough pretty much does this because of that gluten that has formed. And you simply just need to cover it up and let it rest for about 10 minutes and then come back to it and stretch it out again. And when you come back to it, that gluten will have had time to relax and you'll be able to stretch it out to fill out the entire baking sheet. Instead of covering this with a towel, since the oil will get all over your towel, and because I don't really like to use plastic wrap when it's not necessary, I just take another baking sheet of the same size and I flip it over, and that will cover my dough while it is resting and rising the second time. So here it is after 10 minutes after I let it relax, and I'm just going to stretch it out all the way to the corners. And you can see there's lots of olive oil in there, but again, it is really necessary for a good focaccia. So I'll cover that up again, and it's going to rise for another half an hour. After that half hour, when the dough is about ready to bake, I am preheating my oven to 425 degrees, and then I'm going to chop a bunch of vegetables to add on top of my focaccia, which is probably my favorite reason to cook this bread in the summer, because you can use so many different summer veggies on top of it and kind of adapt it to what you have. So today I am going to be using some zucchini, tomatoes, and garlic. I have one yellow zucchini here that I am very thinly slicing. I'm just doing this by hand, but in the past I've also used a mandolin. If you want to get really thin, even slices, you can do that too. But I'm just going to do this by hand and try my best to get these slices really thin. And then I'm going to scatter this on top of my focaccia. You can see that it's really nice and puffy now after having risen for another 30 minutes. And I'm just going to evenly place my zucchini slices over the surface of the bread. I also have a bunch of cherry tomatoes that I am going to have, and also a couple of cloves of garlic that I'm going to thinly slice. I've been doing this combination of vegetables a lot for focaccias lately, but the great thing about this recipe is you can really switch it up depending on the season and what you have available. In the spring, I think an asparagus focaccia would be really good. In the winter, when you don't have a lot of fresh produce, a caramelized onion or a garlic and herb focaccia would be great. Or maybe you can even drizzle some pesto that you've frozen from the summer. There are lots of different options and adaptations that you can take with this once you get that base recipe down. So all of these ingredients are just going to get evenly sprinkled on the top of the focaccia. And the best part of making this bread is at the very end, right before you bake it, you take your fingers and you just gently but firmly press on the risen dough all the way until you can feel that baking sheet. And you're making dimples across the entire surface of the dough. This is so that the bread doesn't get too puffy, because the texture you're going for is kind of like a chewy, dense texture, and this is going to help you get that. And it's just like the best feeling putting your fingers into that like puffy dough. It feels kind of wrong the first time you do it, but then after you've made this a few times, it is such a satisfying feeling. And I like to kind of like press in my toppings into the dough as well to make sure that they really stick. For a finishing touch, I'm going to add another sprinkle of dried rosemary. And then by now the oven should be preheated, so this is going to go in the 425-degree oven for about half an hour. Here's what the focaccia looks like fresh out of the oven, and for the last step we are going to drizzle yet some more olive oil on top. This is going to give you that fresh olive oil flavor. Since the rest of the oil that has been there has been absorbed by the bread and cooked, this is going to give you like a really nice grassy olive oil flavor. The bread looks beautiful, the veggies have started to kind of almost caramelize on the top, and I'm going to let this cool for just a few minutes before we cut it, and while that cools, I'm going to make a very quick salad to go along with our focaccia for dinner. I'm starting off by making a quick salad dressing, and I have this infused vinegar that I have made. I infused white wine vinegar with garlic and fresh basil, and that's been sitting for about a month, and it's time to strain all of those solids out, so I'm just taking the time to do that now because they've had plenty of time to infuse the vinegar. So I'm gonna take a teaspoon or two of that infused vinegar and store away the rest for later. Then I'm going to add just a smidge of Dijon mustard, and then I'm going to drizzle in some extra virgin olive oil to make a really simple vinaigrette for the salad. Then I'm going to toss in some thinly sliced red onions, some tomatoes and cucumbers into this. So just very simple, staple summer vegetables for a really quick, easy salad that you can toss together to accompany any meal. And I'm going to add salt and pepper to that and then mix that all together with the vinaigrette that we just made. And lastly, I am going to add some fresh basil leaves that I'm just going to roughly tear with my hands into large-ish pieces, which is going to complement the tomatoes so well. So I'm going to cut up the focaccia now, and I have half of it on my cutting board because it is a very large slab of bread and I can't fit the entire thing. But that's the thing I love about this recipe. I like to make a really big piece of focaccia because then you have bread for the entire week. It reheats really well. I like to just throw it in a frying pan and pop the lid on, turn on the stove to very, very low, pretty much as low as it will go, and let that heat up over about 10 minutes. So it's kind of a slow process, but that way the bread will get completely heated through and the bottom of the bread will crisp up really nicely when you reheat it that way. And we've really been enjoying having a slice of this in the mornings as part of our breakfast. And here's what the texture looks like. It is a really like dense, chewy texture, and the best part is the bottom where you can see it has fried in that olive oil and you get like a really crispy, bubbly bottom, and it's really, really good. I think this is a really great bread not only to make ahead for the week like I said, but also if you're having some kind of like party or get together, because it looks really pretty with all of the vegetables on top, and again you have a large serving that will feed many people. So served along with the focaccia we have the really simple tomato, cucumber, and onion salad that we whipped up, and I also had some leftover Italian dumpling soup that I had made earlier that week, so we each had a little bowl of that as well. This soup has celery, onions, chickpeas, tomatoes, chicken broth, and I also cut up some of that really large kukuzi gourd that we harvested a week ago. And then I made some simple flour and water dumplings. So it was a really easy soup to make. I didn't really follow any particular recipe, but you can probably just look up Italian dumpling soup and find an official recipe to follow. We usually do have a little bit of soup with every meal, even in the summer, because they're just a really good, easy way to pack in a lot of nutrients and vegetables. And if I just make a big batch for the week, I can reheat a little bit and serve it along with any meal that we're having. And those were our weekend summer meals. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing these different recipes. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.